We begin the current Daf, Mesechta Nazir Daf Lamed Vav. We begin 4 lines up from the bottom of the Yomim of Lamed Hema Beis, where the Gemara goes back to the halacha of our Mishnah. The Gemara is going to introduce a teaching that relates to the opinion of Rabbi Kiva. We had mentioned, we started really the second half of the Mesechta a few blot ago when we started the next parak. We said the parak of Shleisha Minan, there's 3 types of prohibitions that apply to Nazir: Tumah, haircutting, and Yitzim and Agefen. So in that halacha of Yitzim Nagefen, we had mentioned the interesting opinion of Rabbi Kiva, which really today's daf is one of the seminal dafim in regard to halachas of taroivis, of forbidden mixtures, which we had the opinion of Rabbi Kiva of what's known as mishchas, of a mixture. And Gemara is going to discuss the halachic parameters of that suger in halacha. Shir corresponds by Kalzach and Cheskel Turnitam Daf Chaim. I'm doing for today's daf. Something discussed in today's daf are what's called heter mitzdaref le'isser. Was something fascinating that you could actually have a permitted entity combined with the prohibited entity for the shiur of liability of the isser. So even if you don't have the kazayis, let's say, of the isser, the heter that's combined with it will actually be part of that liability. The halacha of bittul b'rayv, which we know that the nullification in the majority. Tful yoim is the halacha that someone who immersed that day is considered still tamei, but he has some level of tahara. Ketei achilas pras is the halacha that you don't have to necessarily eat the prohibited entity in one shot. It has to be within the amount of time that it takes to eat a half of a loaf of bread, which is those 2 meals worth, or basically 1 meal's worth in that amount of time. The halacha of batla daita is kaladim comes in today's daf, that we say that generally we go based on what normal people do. If a person does something that's an aberration from most people, that would not be qualified in halacha as having substance in regards to the halacha. So begin the current daf Lamahema Beis, 4 lines up at the bottom of the Yomim. We had mentioned Rabbi Kiva in the Mishnah that says, "Afila sharei pita b'yayin." Even if you soak your bread in wine, v'yesh b'kadei l'tzar of kazayis, and there's amount to combine it for a kazayis chayiv, you can be chayiv. So even if you don't even have the shiur of wine per se, but as it's soaked in the bread, that's going to create a liability for the shiur, and that's why our Gemara begins its discussion. He says, "Kol isurin Shabbat Torah." Whenever you have a prohibited entity in the Torah, ein heter mitzdaref le'isser. The permitted item doesn't combine for the isser, like Taisus says, and this is on Lamavav Medalv. If you eat, let's say, a piece of meat, and in that piece of meat you have a slice. Sometimes you get it's not so lean the piece, and it has some fats, and that fat is chaylev. The half of zayis, which for the liability you have to eat a kazayis the size of an olive. If half of it is, you got a small piece of meat and you have that, half of it is chaylev, half of it is kosher meat, you're not going to be chayiv. You don't say the heter is mitzaref le'isser, chutz misuri nazir, except for the prohibitions of a nazir. Why here suddenly is the heter mitzaref le'isser? Sharei amre Torah mishras. The Torah tells you in the pasuk in Midbar, mishras, as Tosha quotes the words of the pasuk, "B'chol mishras anavim le'yishta," and whatever is the soaking of the grapes, you shouldn't drink. In other words, if you soak your bread and wine, and you have from the combination of the bread and the wine to combine for the shevet kazayis, you're going to be chayiv. That's how the Gemara is going to darshan it shortly, because as Tosha explains, if you think to say that it's going to be when the wine is soaked in the bread, you have a kazayis of the wine, why do I need a pasuk for that? Who cares that it's soaked in bread? That wouldn't make a difference. Obviously, it's coming to tell us from the extra word mishras that even the bread that it's soaked into is going to give you the liability of that shiur, which Tosha just points out, it's from the word mishras, not from the word mikol. So therefore, the girsa should not be like some Gemaras had it, mishras, and it doesn't say mishras, it says b'chol mishras, because that would have sounded like they were darshing from the word kol. If that would be the case, which this is going to be, we're going to see in the moment, the Gemara should have asked on this opinion of Rebbe Vo also, who's that like Rebbe Loza darshan's kol? Because we're going to ask that on the next opinion of Zeiri. And even if you're going to say that the Rabbanon darshan v'chol mishras, even though they don't darshan kol, as we find in Gemara and Shas, there's a difference between kol and v'chol, but still, what's the Gemara asking later on? How do you know from this word mishras that had to mitzdaref le'isser is coming to tell us? Maybe it's coming to tell us something else. What do you mean? Why didn't you say that we learn that because from instead of kol it says v'chol? Obviously, it says Taisus that it's being learned from the word mishras, not from the word mikol. Okay, so it's just telling us exactly or authenticating where we know this from the word mishras, that it's soaked. Even when it's soaked in something else, that will combine the bread, the carbohydrates of the bread is going to combine for the isser of the wine. Now, Ziri Amar, he says that actually, Av Sa'ir, also the halacha of sa'or, which is regarding the prohibition of sacrificing on the mizbeach. You're not allowed to take v'chol sa'or v'chol davash bal taktiru, that you're not allowed to sacrifice that. If someone goes and he takes a half a zayis of sa'or and a half a zayis of matzah, which is supposed to be unleavened, and you take leavening, you're chayiv, there's a liability. If you take half and half, it's going to combine for cause of kol sa'or lo saktiru, that all sa'or you're not allowed to sacrifice. Says the Gemara, okay, now the Gemara is going to ask on Zeiri. He's saying it's not just by Nazir. He's saying it's also by this halacha of sa'or. The question is, come on, who's that like? Kerabalaza? The Darish Kol? He expounds the word Kol because that's how you're saying it, because it says Kol Sa'ar. Oh, what do you see from Kol? Kol is telling you even if it's combining. Where do we find this? So it's in Pesachim Daf Membez Amud Aleph that it says in the Torah, Kol Machmetzes Lo Sechelu. You're not allowed to eat chametz on Pesach. So that includes Kuta Chabavli, which was a Babylonian dip that had some moldy bread inside of it, Sheikha Hamadi, which is a type of a beer, which Osha has some wheat inside of it, which Rebbe Lazar says, because it says Kol Machmetzes Lo Sechelu, from the word Kol, we include, versus the Rabbanan disagree on that, which Rashi in Perek Elo Eben there explains. That Zeiri explains the Braisa, that when it says in the Pasuk, Ki Chol Tzor B'chol Dabash Lo Sektiru, the Braisa says over there, I would only know if it's all Sa'or, Miktsasa Minayin, how do I know if it's even some of that? It says Kol. Now, the Braisa says, and Tais is going through the detail because it's important to understand where Zeiri knows his teaching from. So it's based on how you learn the Braisa that's brought up within Pesachim. Now, the Braisa then says Eruve Minayin. How do you know the mixture is going to be forbidden? Because it says Kikol. In other words, I would only know if it's the whole Zayis. How do I know if even some of it, meaning Achatzi Zayis? So that's what teaches Kol, which that is Heter Mitzarf Le'isr. In other words, what he means to say is a half a Zayis from Sa'ar and half a Zayis from Matzah. That's what Rashi explains how you see Zeiri also holds that it's going to be that the Heter of the Matzah is going to be Mitzarf to the Isr of the Sa'ar, that you can have the liability of a full Kazayis. The problem, says Taisus, according to Rashi's interpretation, is if that's the case, then Zeiri is really explaining the Braisa the way Abai explains over there in Menachas Daf Menachas and Aleph. And the problem is, as our Gemara is going to say in a moment, that actually Zeiri's teaching is actually coming to exclude from Abai. Additionally, what's difficult is, what's the Gemara asking who Zeiri like is like Rabbi Lazar? It's not true. It could even be like the Rabbanan. Because although the Rabbanan don't darshan the word kol, but ki kol, as the Gemara says in Pesachim Daf Mem Gimel Beis, they do darshan. And if that's the case, the Rabbanan would also darshan the first drasha of b'miktsasa minayin. In other words, that chatzi zayis sa'or and chatzi zayis matzah, we learn that from ki kol sa'or. So although the Rabbanan don't darshan the last drasha because they don't have kol, but from like Rabbi Lazar, but the first drasha that's the more pashut one, they would darshan like Rabbi Lazar does from kol, they would darshan from ki kol. So how do you say that this teaching is only like Rebbe Lazar, not like the Rabbanan? So therefore Taisus says that actually Zeiri explains the Braisa over there like the way Rava explains over there. That you have to read the Braisa like this. Ainli elikuloi, what does that mean? I would only know the liability of Sa'ar is only if you bring the whole kaimitz from Sa'ar, not the whole kazayis, the whole kaimitz. Now a kaimitz is 2 zaysim, because he holds that a kaimitz is not less than 2 olive size. When it says in the Braisa Miktsas Minayin, what it means to say is, if half of the kaimitz, which is a kazayis, how do I know that? That I know from kol. When it says a ruva minayin, that's a chatzi zayis of sa'ar, a chatzi zayis of matzah, which that's het mitzarf l'issa. How do I know that? That's tamalemek ki kol. Oh, now it makes sense that the Gemara over here is saying who's Zeiri like is like a Belazar who darshans kol. Yes, so we say that kol is coming to include a half of a kaimitz, which we learn, and ki kol is le'eruvai, which is hetem mitzarf l'issa, like we explained. But according to Rabbanan, that they don't darshan kol, they only darshan ki kol, which is l'miktsasai. That's the first drasha, the simplest drasha. That is for only the half of the kaimitz, which is a full zayis. But regarding eruvai, which is hetem mitzarf l'issa, that to say half of the zayis, that you don't see here at all, and therefore that's why our Gemara is saying that Zeiri is specifically like Rebbe Lazar, not like the Rabbanan. But then says Taisus, if you're going to say, according to Abai, that he darshans Miktsas Minayin means a Chatzi Zayis, and he holds that a Haktar could be less than a Kazayis, so then what are you saying, Eruva Minayin? According to Abaya, you don't need a ruvay to have heter mitzaref l'isser because the isser itself, you're going to be chayiv even less than that amount. He says you don't need that amount. So what you can say is that he's going to explain, you're right, a ruvay minayin means actually when it's dissolved. The reisha, the brisa, that's including even the half azayis, is when it's extant. And the safest, even if it's not even extant, it's just dissolved, it's not recognizable. That's how it explains over there in Menachis. That's how Abai would explain. Okay, but basically going back to our Gemara, we start off that we said, although generally we don't say heter mitzaref l'isser, but by Nazir says Rebavo, we do say because of Mishras. And Ziri said you also say it by the isser of sacrificing sa'ir on the flower offerings on the Mizbeach. And the Gemara says, who is that like? That's like a Belazar, because how do you see by Sa'ar, by Nazir, it says Mishras, which we said the soaking is obviously saying the bread's combining. Where do you see by Sa'ar? Because it says the word Kol. Who says Kol? As Tais just went through in great detail to show. That's Rabbi Belazar, not like the Rabban. Says the Gemara, Zeiri, oh really? You know it from the word Kol like Rabbi Belazar? So if that's the case, let's give you another one. Le'inyan chametz nami, regarding chametz, you should also say on Pesach, where according to Rabbi Belazar, that's actually his source, that heter mitzaref l'isser, because there it says kol machmetzes lo'isachelu. You should say heter mitzaref l'isser there too. Says the Gemara en hochanami. Yes, that is the case. That Zeiri would say that also regarding chametz on Pesach, that you'd be chayiv for the taroivus. Ella, but the case of Sa'ir is better for him to talk about, because he's just coming to tell you another chiddush parenthetically lafukim Abaya. That he's coming to say that excluding from Abaya's opinion. Because the Amar yesh aktar bepachas megazayis, as we just mentioned, Taisus Abaya holds that actually the liability of sacrificing sa'ar on the mizbeach is even for less than the kazayis. Kamash malan, that's what Zeir is teaching us. No, ein aktar bepachas megazayis. There's no liability of sacrificing sa'ar of less than the size of an olive. It's only through tziruv. Then yes, you could be chayiv, because that's what we're learning out like a Belazar from the word kol. But without tziruv, no. So that's why he picked the Sa'ir, just to tell you, parenthetically, to exclude from Abaya. That's, now, Abaya explains the Bryce over there in Perek HaManachas. He says, when the Bryce says, Inli ili kuloi, that would mean a kazais. Miktsasai, which is a half azais, which that's what it has, a ruvei minayin means to say, when there's very little of Sa'ir mixed in, because I would have thought to say that since it's mixed into the heter should become bottle, that's what it teaches kikol. So you're right, according to Abaya, it's nothing to do with tziruf. It's telling you that even pachas mekazayis of sa'ar you're going to be chayv. But then so Tosfos, if you're going to say that according to Abaya that he darshans from kol sa'ar for less than the kazayis, then why doesn't he darshan also by chametz to be chayv on it less than the kazayis according to Belazar? Because you darshan kol and you're darshaning it even without heter mitzaref l'isser. He's saying it's even if it just has less on its own merit. Says Tosfos, no, by chametz is different because it says the wording of eating, and we know there's a Talmudic dictum ein achila pachas mekazayis. So if the Torah tells you not to eat, it automatically means a kazayis. So then you would have to come on to the halacha of heter mitzaref l'isser, like Rabbi Elazar says it over there in regard to isab chametz. But regarding to the sa'ir of the isab sacrifice on mizbech, yeah, that could be according to Abai even less than the kazayis. Okay, now it says the Gemara Yosef Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi was sitting. So again, we had said heter mitzaref l'isser on Issa Yain Nazir, Sir Bebal Taktira, and Issa Achilas Chametz. So the Gemara tells us that Yosef Rav Dimi become lal hashmaita. He was saying about this teaching over Rabbi Vo, that by other surim we don't say heter mitzaref l'isser. We said it by 3 places, but generally you don't say it. On that, Abaya asked from the Mishnah Mesechtes Tful Yoim. The Mishnah says as follows: Hamikpah, which is a type of what's called a cereal or porridge or some type of farina, shal truma of truma. So it's a thick dish called daisa. So if it's truma grain, and now vashum vashemen, the garlic, the oil, which you're putting into spice, is shal chulin, is of chulin. Now the nugget tful yoim b'miktsasna. Tful yoim, as we said in the introduction, is someone who is tamei still, although he was purified himself by going into the mikveh. But for truma, we know tful yoim is not sufficient, because he has to wait for sundown for Erev Shemesh. So William touched some of the porridge. He's like, oh, this, like, those kids, people always touching and they're pointing and they actually touch the thing itself. He's touching. So Allah is paslas kulan. He goes and he validates the whole thing, because the primary thing is the cereal, is the porridge, and that's truma. And the tful yoim invalidates, makes tamei truma. But however, if mikveh shel chulin, if the cereal is made from grains of chulin. V'ashum v'ashemen shel truma. It's only the spices, the garlic and the oil that's of truma. But now Tvuyim touches some of the porridge. He's only going to make tamei only the place where he touches. It's really possible because a Tvuyim only makes it that it's going to make that tamei, not something else tamei. Only makes what he touched tamei. That's it. Now, Vavinba, we had asked on this Mishnah, says Abai, he's using this all to develop his question on Rebbe Bo. We had asked on this Mishnah that Makam Agoy my puzzle. Why is the place where you touch even puzzle? But the spices should be bottled, because as Tais explains, he holds that dimua, which is a mixture of truma and chulin, rabbinically is only forbidden. Because biblically, it's bottled in a simple majority of 2-1. And obviously, if the porridge is all chulin and just the spices is truma, it's going to be bottled in 2-1. Just that we say that truma needs to have a ratio of 100-1, that's rabbinic. But biblically, which we're talking about the laws of tumah, it's bottled in a simple majority. So the question is, even when you touched, why is that a problem? He had said, Ma Tam, you want to know what the reason why that is? The reason is, since a non-kohen would get lashes if he ate an olive size of this truma, so it still has the shame of truma on it because of the chiv of the lashes of a zar. So therefore, regarding truma also, we also say that it has the designation of truma on it. Now, as Tais explains, however, it's not as stringent as truma itself to invalidate the whole mixture, but we do consider it like a quasi truma to at least make puzzle the place where you touch. That's how Rashi explained the Pesachim. But he says Rabbi Tam finds this difficult because the Gemara was asking that it should be batal b'roiv. Sounds like that the garlic and the oil are not visible, because something that's visible doesn't become batal. The problem is it doesn't sound like that because you're saying v'nugget tfulya mimiktsas, if you touch some of it, that sounds like that it's going on, what is some of it? The garlic and the oil, which is what the truma is, because again the porridge, the mikveh is chulin, but that's not the right. Toy says the right is because it doesn't say b'miktsasa, it says b'miktsasai. So it sounds like that you're touching the garlic and the oil. Obviously that sounds like that it's be'en, that it is visible, because you're touching it, or else you can't say you're touching it. But B'miktsasa, Taisa says that sounds like it's touching the shum and the shemen.
So as long as it was laying next to truma, it's okay?
What do you mean laying next to?
Like it's on the same table.
It's mixed into the porridge.
Oh, it's mixed in.
It's mixed in, yeah. So moreover, you have the end of this Mishnah, Masechtas Tful Yom, that Yehuda says, he says, when did we say this? Is when it's solid in a plate. Again, it sounds like that it's visible. Additionally, it's difficult to the Riva that the Mishnah over there says, if you have a dough that has the truma mixed into it. So it doesn't become possible from a Tful Yom. Whereas Rabbi Shimon, they say no, it does become possible. So it says, obviously we see that it's mixed in and it's not recognizable, that no one differentiates between the place where you're touching and the place that you're not touching. Rather, the one who says us is the whole thing, and one that says mut is the whole thing. So, if Taisus, they're all the same type of questions on how Rashi on how the Rashi is interpreting. So, Rabbi Tam actually says a very different type of pshat. He says talking about that the garlic and the oil are scattered over the porridge, and it's recognizable. And the first case of when the porridge is of truma and the garlic and the oil is all chulin, what you could say is that the reason why it's going to be a problem is because the garlic and the oil are like a yad l'tumah. Interesting, meaning we know there's halacha of a handle, of a secondary element for the tumah, because by the halacha of handles of food items, we say in general, as the Gemara says in Chulin of Kofiyot Ches, that they could bring on tumah. So therefore, no matter where you touch, it's all going to become tummy. But in the case of the sefer, when the porridge is chulin and the garlic and the oil are truma, so it's only going to validate only the garlic and the oil that you touched. And that's what the girsa is that we asked, the mokam agoy my puzzle. So what does that mean? Why are we asking? Why wouldn't it make puzzle at least the garlic and the oil that you touch? I know it's not going to make everything else tummy, but why wouldn't that? Because the way Rabbi Tam explains it, because it didn't have a share of a kabeya. That's the Gemara's question, which Rashi doesn't like that girsa, because many places Rashi explains that an oichel is makabel tumah, even a kolshu. Like Yidash and some Teres Kainim, Oichel Yitma teaches that Matamba Koshu. You would think it's Matama other things in Koshu also. That's a Sadash Yoichel. No, that's only something that could be eaten in one shot with Shirba Kabeya. But itself could be even less than the Kabeya. Which Rabbi Tam says, no, that's a Smacht Be'alma. Because in Mesechtes Olis, the Mishnah teaches Pachas mekibeya v'oichlin, it diminishes the area of a doorway to close it off, which the Sefer teaches this the klal. If it's tamei, it's not mamayit the Pesach from the kanas from tumah. So you see that it's not the case. So Rabbeinu Tam holds that it's only an asmachta be'alma. Now this that we're inferring, but it's not a kebeya, says the way Rabbeinu Tam learns, says Taisus, you have to say that it's not going on shemen. It's only going in the shum, on the garlic, because mashkin armatam apachas from a revius. So upon them, Rabbeinu Tam has a very different way of asking the Gemara's question. It's more like, because it doesn't have the shear. But then the question is, what's the question? But what do you mean garlic? The truth is that it's not makabel tuma less than the kebeya midaraisa, but still that midrabanan it is going to be possible. So even though it's not makabel tuma midaraisa, midrabanan is going to be tummy. So what's the question that, so maybe it's going to be possible means midrabanan? What's the whole question? Why is it going to be possible? Says Taisus, no, the word puzzle sounds like it's biblical. Okay, so now the Gemara was answering, you want to know why is it puzzle? So according to Rabbeinu Tam, because since the Zar gets Malkus and the Bekazayis, which Taisus says, it's lav dafka, it's picking the word loika, because again, we're saying that the truma of garlic itself is actually rabbinic. Rather, what it means to say is, since a Zar would get Malkus on it, Bekazayis had it been truma deraisa, so we're going to consider it significant, and it's not going to be bottle to the mikvah, to the porridge. And therefore, it does retain its status of truma, and therefore you would get malchus. Again, so basically, the main point that the Gemara is trying to say is, Abai didn't say his question yet, but he quoted the Mishnah that said that when you have the porridge is chulin and the spices is truma, that okay, only when you touch it can become possible. Which the question was, why even when you touch it can be possible? Which we have two different interpretations of Rashi and Tam what the question is. But ultimately, the Gemara's answer really is the same, saying that okay, because we consider it as truma if a zar would eat of it a kazayas, if it were truma deraisa. So therefore, we still consider it significant, and therefore, it still has the shame of truma on it, and therefore, if you touch the spices, at least that area is going to become tummy. Okay, but this is where Abai concludes his question on Rebavohu. Says, wait a second. My time, what's the reason that if a zar would eat from it a kazayas, he would get lashes? Again, if it was truma deraisa, so that you're considering it still as truma. Regarding the halach of truma that we touching me pasal as you continue them with bays, wait a second. La mishum dehetem mitzdaref leisser. Because how are you going to have a kazayas of liability? Only because the porridge is combining with the spices for your kazayas. Which Taisa says, what do you mean? Why don't you say that the Zar gets Malchus and the Kazayas if he would gather all the spices that are scattered throughout the top of the porridge, and then you would have a Kazayas? How do you know? So Taisa, the Re says that no, that's not the way a person normally eats. And for that reason itself, we shouldn't say that it's not going to be bottled to the porridge. It sounds like that it's mixed in, and you're eating your farina, and you have those truma spices, and if you were a Zar, you would get Malchus. Says Abayu, you see, not like Rebavo. You see, hetem mitzdaref leisser, because that's the whole reason why we said that there's going to be tum over here. Again, there's a few steps over here, but we had explained that the reason why there's tum over here, b'makam magoi, is because if a zar had eaten it, you see, he would get malchus. So therefore, you see, it is still called truma, even, and it's not going to be bottled, even though it really should be bottled, but it's not going to be bottled. So therefore, that's why it's going to have tumah when you touch it. Says Abai, what do you mean? How could a zar get malchus if he eats it? When he's eating it, he's eating a gazayas. You're not having a gazayas of truma. You're having the porridge with it. So you see that the hetetz mistarav to the isser. So you see, not like Rabavohu. He said we don't say hetetz mistarav isser in all other yisurim, except for Nazir, or we said maybe sa'ar, maybe chometz, but we don't say it. And that says the Gemara. So obviously, even by other yisurim we hold hetetz mistarav isser, and you said it's only by Nazir. So it says the Gemara, Amalei Rav Dimi said to him, no, my kazayas. What do we mean over here that we're going to get lashes if there's already eaten it? That is the ikka kazayas b'chtei achilas pras. That is that you have the amount of eating an olive in the shear of eating a half a loaf of bread, which is, let's say, between 2, 4, 9 minutes, whatever it is. That is, you're going to actually eat from the isser itself, a kazayas. Then you're going to get lashes. Now Tosfos says, okay, wait a second. if you have the girsa of Rashi, remember we had two ways of explaining the Gemara up until this point. Rashi's girsa was that, wait a second, why would it be a problem of b'mak where you touched it, but it should be batal? Okay, so now the Gemara is answering that since we see that you get malchus for the isser, obviously it's not batal regarding the isser. That's the whole point we're saying, that it's still going to be like the isser if you eat of it. Same thing is regarding, it's not going to be batal for the halachas of tumah. That's how we explained that Mishnah in Tvul Yom. But according to Rabbi Tam's girsa, the question was, but you don't have a kabeya from the truma, so how could you go ahead and make a puzzle? So what's the Gemara answering now? Since the zar is going to get lashes for the isra of eating it, pras, but still, how could they make the truma puzzle? And how are you going to have the het to being mitzaref to the isra regarding maga, but regarding malchus, you don't say het to mitzaref le isra. Says Taisus, no. According to Rabbi Tam, yes, you could say that since regarding malchus, it would be effective the het to mitzaref le isra to get malchus, because if he would gather the isra from the parish and eat it, he would not get malchus because that's not the normal way of eating, like we explained. Obviously, it is effective that the heter that you're eating with the porridge to combine it for the isra of malchus, so therefore it would be effective the heter mitzaref to the isra to become puzzle, even though that you don't have where you're touching a kabeya. Shtais doesn't like it so much, but if you eat from it a shiur of a pras, which is the amount of 4 eggs, you're going to have a kezayis of truma, and therefore you're going to be chayiv, and it's not going to be bottled. So that's how Rabbi Tam would explain it, that it's you are still seeing this idea of the shiur of a kabeya. Now, but according to Rashi at least, which is the more simple understanding, that, oh, no, you don't see anything about het mitzaref le'is over here. You're eating a shiur of a kazayis in that amount of time of v'kteichilas pras. So again, this is bringing a lot of halachas of tarevis in here in the sugya of yerdei, of eating forbidden things, which now the Gemara jumps on that and says that really, v'achilas pras da'iraisehi, that you're telling me that the eating of the shiur of a pras is biblical, because that's how you're saying that you're going to have this halacha of the zar being chayiv malchus for eating truma, even though the mice of the porridge is scattered, the spice is scattered throughout the porridge, but he'll be able to eat fast enough that he'll be eating the shiur of a kezayis b'chteichil's pras. So therefore, that's what you have, not because it had mitzvah l'issa. Now the Ram Taisa brings says, what do you mean? It's a Mishnah increases. All food items combined if you eat in the shiur b'chteichil's pras. So what's the Gemara asking? Oh, really? Is that deraisa? So it says Taisa, that's to eat chaylev, which is recognizable. But b'tarevis, when it's in a mixture, since you're not saying heter mitzaref le'issa, it should be batal. And also, if you would gather the issa from the heter and eat it by itself, b'chteichil's pras, and that's the Gemara saying that the issa itself you shouldn't be chayiv for. Even if you don't say heter mitzaref with it, the Gemara is asking, really, is ksayis b'chteichil's pras deraisa even in such a case? Meaning, yes, if you have a regular isra in front of you, you're eating it not in one shot, that we know is going to be het mitzaref le'issa, but we don't know in certain cases, like when it's all mixed together or scattered throughout, and now you're trying to gather it or you're eating it with the heter, that as a mixture, that we never know for sure. That's a biased question. But the Rashbam finds it difficult, he says, because what's the Gemara's question? Even if the kizayis b'chteichil's pras was not deraisa, it should still be a problem because of what's called tam ki'ikr. Tam ki'ikr, which again, these are more ideas. We have incredible ideas here in Mesechta Nazir regarding the halachas of tarevis that Abaye himself brings later on from the halacha of mishras, what's called, when you have the wine soaking in the bread, what's called litin tam ki'ikr, that the taste of the wine is like the wine itself. So the bread itself...
Is it shiur to Tom?
What?
Is it shiur?
So we're going to see exactly on the next daf regarding this halacha of tam ki'ikr. But if it has a taste of the ikr, it's going to have the halacha like the ikr itself. You wonder what's considered taste. But obviously you see that the isser prohibits when it gives taste and it's not batal, because it just as long as it gives taste. So for sure over here, where the ikr itself is not batal, because you have the ikr, meaning it's just mixed together. Meaning what's he asking, is that really so? Is eating b'chteichil's pras deraisa? Because you're telling me because it's mixed together, maybe you don't say the halacha of b'chteichil's pras. What do you mean? You say even the halacha of tam ki'ikr. You have even just the taste, you say like the primary. If the ikr is for sure mixed in, for sure it's not going to be batal. So on that, the Rashbam answer, he says that at this point the Abaya understands that tam ki'ikr is not going to be chayiv only if you eat a kazayas of the tam in one shot. For example, when you swallow a kazayas of wine in 2 olives sizes of bread and you eat in one shot. So logic would say that, the tam should not be more chomer than the ikr. And the ikr itself, he holds right now, that you're not going to be chayiv also only if you eat in one shot. Meaning, although he says tam ki ikr, but yeah, that's in one shot. But if it's not in one shot, he wouldn't be chayiv. So therefore, maybe here also he's saying, even when the ikr, when the wine itself, when you have the isser itself, the truma that's mixed in, whatever it is, but if it's not kedei achilas pras, who said, even if it's kedei achilas pras, who said that's going to be chiv midaraisa to tell me that the zar is going to be like a malchus? That I don't know. So Amalayin says yes, eating b'kedei achilas pras is daraisa. And that says Abayach, if that's the case, am I plig Rabban led Rabbi Lazar b'kutach habavli? Why do the Rabban disagree with Rabbi Lazar by kutach habavli? Kutach habavli was a Babylonian dip, which the assumption right now is that there is a kezayis, which is this moldy bread that you have, a b'chtei chilas pras, and this kutach habavli had sauerkraut. It was like one of these Babylonian dips. Now, there's a machlokes regarding if there's going to be liability of eating that chametz on Pesach. Now, what Abai is asking is like this. He says, according to me, makes sense. Because the porridge sounds like that because of hetem mitztaref le'isser, which, okay, that is because of Rebbe Lazar darshan's kol. But according to Rabbanan, they don't darshan kol. So obviously that's why they're going to disagree with Rebbe Lazar. But according to you that you're quoting from Rabbi Yechanan, that the malchus is because of a svara, which is of the svara of kedei achilas pras. So then we don't find any Tana disagreeing. So why would Rabban disagree on the kutach habavli? Why won't you be chayiv for eating it? Because you're going to get a kazayis of the moldy bread b'kedei achilas pras. But then the begin to say, why don't you say that when the Rabban disagree with kutach habavli, that's when you're not going to eat from the kutach only an exact kazayis, where you're not going to eat a kazayis from the isser. Rabbi Lazar says you're going to be chayiv because he darshans that all of the het is mitzaref to the isser. But if you eat so much that you have a kazayis b'chilas pras, maybe Rabban would agree that you would be chayiv. So it's a biased question. So it says what you could say is, no, from the wording in the Gemara Pesachim, which brings this machlokes, that on chametz of dog and gomer, you get an einish of karas. But on its mixture, you don't get anything. That's what the Rabbanan say. Sounds like even if you eat from the kutach a lot, that you'll have a kazayis b'chilas pras, not exactly a kazayis, that even then we're saying you're not going to be chayiv. So again, that's the question of Abaya. According to you, why are you not going to be chayiv from the Rabbanan on eating kutach habavli if you're going to get this issa deraisa of eating kazayis b'chilas pras? Amalei said to him, no, hanach kutach habavli, leave the kutach habavli, the lek kazayis b'chilas pras. You don't get a kazayis of the moldy bread in the amount of time of eating a half a loaf of bread of, let's say, 4 minutes. Because as far as the Gemara explains, if the guy swallows the dip, come on, that's not how you eat a dip. But l'daite it's kaladam. So his aberration, his intention, his action is nullified, which actually there's 2 interpretations in Taisus. Taisus means that Rashi and Pesachim say that, if a guy does it, he's going to be potter because that's not the way of normally eating. Which Taisus says, no. If it's going to happen, you're going to be chayav, but they're not talking about such a case. So those are 2 different ways of explaining what it is. But either way, we don't talk about a case of a guy swallowing a whole. So that's not how a guy eats. And if he's just dipping in as normally as the Babylonian dip was eaten, you're not going to have an olive size of bread in the amount of time of eating a half a loaf of bread. And that's similarly like the case that they disagree regarding the median beer that they had. Even though you normally drink it as one, but you don't normally drink it so much cups consecutive that you'll have the amount of carbohydrates b'chtei chilas pras. Because if you do drink it like that, again, it's bottled out, it's kaladam. So again, that's why the Rabban disagree, because you're not going to get it, but of course, then it would be. And if you don't have any raya that you're asking me, you're showing me a halacha that had mitzvah l'isser. No, not that had mitzvah l'isser. It's because you're going to get a gezayis of the isser itself, b'chtei chilas pras. But however, Abai continues to ask, again, what we're trying to stay focused on, although we're getting on, like we always do, to explain what the Gemara is saying, the main focus is the halacha of Bavo, that he's saying, like we see Rabbi Kiva in our Mishnah of Mishras, we don't find anywhere het mitzav lis, except by Nazir, maybe by Sa'ar, maybe by Chametz, but everything else we don't find. And Rabbi is going to ask, he said, I'm going to show you do find places that het mitzav lis. We ask from the following brisa. Shtei maduches. You have 2 mortars V'yesh ben tavlin, and there's spices inside of them, where someone was crushing spices. Now, achash al truma, one of the mortars, one of the place where they crushed the spice had truma inside of it, truma spices. The other one had chulin. Now, lefanav shtei kedeches. In front of these two mortars were two pots. Achash al truma, v'achash chulin. Again, you have these two neighbors. One's the Kayin, one's the Yisrael, and now one pot had truma, one had chulin. Now, v'naflu eilu teich eilu. What happened is some kids were playing around, whatever happened. Now, one mortar fell into one pot, and the other one fell into the other one. Now, shtei mutachas. Both pots are going to be mutter. Why? Because I'm going to say like this. Chulin l'tei chulin naflu. I'm going to assume that the chulin mortar fell into the chulin pot, but truma naflu, and the truma fell into the truma pot. So therefore, the truma is still good for the kohen, and the chulin is still good for the Yisrael. That's what the Brisa says. Asks Abaya under Rav Dimi, if you're going to entertain to say that kizay yisbechdechel is pras deraisa, you're telling me this halacha that even if you don't eat the isser straight up, one shot, you're eating regular. But in your eating of those 4 minutes, 9 minutes, whatever it is, you're going to get the kizayis of the isser. That's a biblical prohibition. Wait a second. Why is this bright saying, that I'm going to say? Because since if the truma might have fell into the chulin pot, the zar is going to be chayiv misa. Come on, we shouldn't be toil lahakal, because it's not logical to say to the Gemara that you're not going to have a kazayis for the chil's pras. And according to you, this is problematic. Look, if it's the Rabbanan, like I would say, okay, something to Rabbanan, the kula. But there's a derais over here. If the truma fell into the chulin thing, you have all these truma spices, and this Yisrael is taking home his pot, and he's eating his cholent, and he's got all the truma. He's chayiv misa. So how can you say that? Says Gemara, wait a second. So he responds back to Abai, Ilamai, so what do you want to tell me? According to you, you're trying to tell me, so what do you see from here? That no, it's not true. You don't say the halacha of Kedai Chelas Pras. You say, Hetem Mitzaf Le'eser. That's what you wanted to prove to me. You wanted to prove to me by Truma, you'll say, because what's permitted combines for the Isser. According to you also, they have the same question. Why am I going to say that I'm going to say? According to you, you also have the problem. Your chalent of chulin should combine with the Isser. There's two ways you can get to the problem over here. Either the way Rav Dimi has to say, which is because you're going to have a shiur kizayis b'chilas pras, because that's how he holds, but based on how he had to answer a previous Mishnah. Abayi says no, you don't say that. You don't say kidei chilas pras. You say het mitzvah l'isser. You run into the same problem. If het is mitzvah l'isser, that means the cholent that you're eating, you have the truma spices and the potatoes and the meat in your cholent is combining to the truma. Which Taisus wonders, says, why couldn't Abaya answer that even though you say by the case of the porridge, het mitzvah l'isser, that he wanted to prove not like Rabbi Yechanan, well, that's like Rabbi Lazar who darshans kol. This this price I'm asking from is like Rabban who don't darshan kol. So therefore, no, that's why it's not going to be asur. Says Taisus, no, because the Gemara doesn't want to make a machlekes, two brises, one with the other. No, if that one's like Rabbi Lazar, and Abai is explaining it based on het mitzvah l'isser, then this one would also be. But Taisus says some don't even have this gear of the Gemara that we just said. But Akapan, the Gemara says, Elo, rather, Hanach letrumas tavlan, leave alone the halacha. Yes, it's truma. And yes, midaraisa, you can say it to Mr. Flis, and you have the problem Abaya. And yes, according to me, I say it could be chilchis bras daraisa, I would have the problem. But we're talking about trumas tavlan. Truma spices, drabbani, it's only rabbinic. Because the Torah of truma, min Torah, is only dogon, tirash, v'yitzar. And that's why we're going to be Torah lahakal. Not because the concepts are derabbanan, the concepts are deraisa, but the object is derabbanan. Because the truma is only the truma of shum and shem or whatever it is, and therefore it's not going to be a problem. Okay, Eisvei, the Gemara continues, Abai continues to ask on this halacha of Rabbi Yechanan. Shtei kupos. If someone has two boxes and there's grain inside of them, again, same type of case. Achat truma, one's of truma, achat chulun, one's of chulun. In front of them is two measuring bowls that are have a sa. And again, same type of case. That the sa'an, the measuring things fall into the boxes. They're both permitted. Because I will say, and truma. These are you're going to think to say, ask Abaya on him. Wait a second, why do I say I'm going to say? Well, if you're going to be eating in there, you might have a kizayis b'chilas pras. So why are we asking from the same again? says you tint out lam zayman alf. We'll see why here it's different. Bishlam l'didi says Abai, according to me, makes sense because before you wanted to ask me and you said Abaya, according to you it's also difficult. So it must be we're talking about spices that are rabbinic and it's not going to be difficult on either one of us. No, says Abai, this case is different. It sounds very similar, but it's different. Because according to me, that means that I say Mishum the Hetem Mitzvah L'Isser, the problem that you would run into, I don't hold the K'neichel Pras Deraisa. I hold that Hetem Mitzvah L'Isser, yeah, but here you cannot say that. You know why? We're talking about where there's a lot of chulin. And to say Hetem Mitzvah L'Isser, we only say when there's more Isser than Heter. When there's more Isser than Heter, then we'll say it's going to combine. But here, no, you have more chulin. So you're not going to have a problem with Hetem Mitzvah L'Isser. But according to you, the Amr that you say, wait a second. Doesn't make a difference out of chulin. Doesn't make a difference. You'll still get your truma b'cheiches pras. So how can you say shani yom if it's direct according to you? So Malay said to him, no, I'm going to give you the same type of answer. It's talking about in today's times, which anyways the truma is rabbinic. So it's the same type of an answer, just not because of tavlin, but because it's manazeh. Now Tosfos says, he has a question. He says, Kutach HaBavli, the Babylonian dip, had more heter than isser. The chametz, the moldy bread inside the kutach, mostly was this sour cream, whatever it is. It was not the mostly moldy bread. So according to what Abai is saying, why would it be a problem of heter mitzvah l'isser? Moreover, he says by the meduchis, the case we had just before by the mortars, the Gemara was medayik. Oh, so what are you going to say? They asked back on the baya, heter mitzvah l'isser. So why are you saying shani yomer? Why didn't Abai answer the same answer? Why didn't you say that nefishi chulin? What do we do? Because it was much more in the chulin pot than the truma spices that were there. Why didn't you give the same answer? So Tais brings from his Rebbe that most definitely, when you have nois and tam, when it gives taste, for example, by the kutach habavli, the Babylonian dip, and by the meduchas, by the mortars, the isser gives tam. It's spices. It's the moldy bread. It's giving taste. Then you're going to say the het is mistarf to the isser. Whereas over here, the last case of the two boxes, in that case, it's talking about that they're both the same type. Then you're not going to say heter mitzvah l'isser because the heter was more than the isser. So then right away the isser is going to be bottle. And therefore we're going to be lenient. Meaning in Bechlal, when we talk about taroivis, we always talk about min b'mina, min b'she'ena mina. Min b'she'ena mina, it has a chumrah because it gives taste. When it's the same type, it's not giving taste, it's the same thing. What's brings that on, do is zel bazach. So that's how Taya says, that's why it's different than the previous two cases. But then it says, as we begin to say, if that's the case, so what do I need to say, Shani Omer? Why don't you say that even if Truma fell into the Chulun, it's bottle and derive? Why is the Brisa saying, oh, Shani Omer? Okay, I'll say. Why Shani Omer? What do I have to say? I'll say. Why don't you say it's bottle and derive? That's a more of a salient point. So it says what you can say is, no, at this point the Gemara understands that Truma Bizman says deraisa. It's only the Gemara answer that says derabanan. By deraisa, we're not toila lahakal if you don't have two reasons. You have to have two reasons. One, you have to have more of the heter than the iser, and also you have to say shani omer. Then I'll say, okay, mastama the chulin found the chulin and Truma found the, or whatever. At least I'll allow that assumption, and that's how the Gemara also asks Rabbi Yochanan in Yevamos Apei Omen Aleph. Now, Tosfos says that. So what happened was Abai was asking on Rabbi Vo. He says, but according to you that you hold the kazayis bechil's pras, when there's a lot of chulun, who cares? So he says, wait a second. Based on what we explained just before, that you're telling me that, and this is how we had to explain for Abaya. We're talking about it's min b'minoi, it's the same type, it's not giving taste. So what's the question? Min b'minoi, min deraisa is batal b'raiv. So then you have two reasons for heter. One, it's because you have more heter than iser, and you have the shah and the aimer. So what's the question on Rabbi Yochanan? So on that, he brings from his Rebbe who answers that if it's true that a kizayis b'chleachis pras is deraisa by min b'she'ena minay, then even min b'minay we should not be teila hakol by relying on that there's more heter than iser, because it makes sense that the chacham should be machmer similar to the chumrah of min b'she'ena minay. That's how they should be machmer also by min b'minay. But what Tosfos says, what's difficult is that by heter mitzdarf le'iser, when it's einay minay, the chachamim should be machmer. So it brings from the Ramar or whatever that is. That's not similar. Why? Because the chiv of kezayis b'chtechel's pras, it applies even if some of it's also min b'minay. Because since it's eating also some of the iser, because it would be recognized, would you be chayv on it minat Torah? And since kezayis b'chtechel's pras is deraisa, but hetem mitzdarf le'iser, which it never applies when you have more chulin, that even would be recognizable, we wouldn't be chayv minat Torah. So therefore, that's why there's a differentiation between the halacha of hetem mitzdarf le'iser and between the halacha of b'chtechel's pras. But upon them, the way the Gemara ended off is that it's not difficult on the halacha of Yechel. It could be that you don't find any other place of hetem mitzdarf le'iser, and it's based on the principle that we asked from because of b'chtechel's pras. And then Abaye asked from all these places that you see Kedeichil's pras, and says no, you don't necessarily see Kedeich. You don't meaning that you're going to say Hetem Mitzdarf le'Isser. It says no, not necessarily because of Hetem Mitzdarf le'Isser, and could be that you don't say it. You would only say because of Kedeichil's pras. And if you say Kedeichil's pras, what do you do with these cases? Why are we being makel? It says we're being makel because they're rabbinic cases. But you're right. If it would be deraisa, we'd be b'machmer because of a kedei achilles pras. You're not chayv only if you eat it one shot, even if you do it over a time span. Thank you to any time for hosting us.